My name is Marjorie Caldwell. I'm 68. The house smelled of nutmeg and roasted turkey when I stepped into the kitchen. And for a moment, I let myself believe the warmth belonged to me. The silverware gleamed under the chandelier, Lydia's chandelier, technically, and the Christmas tree in the front parlor glowed through the glass like a magazine photo. She had insisted on the theme this year, gold and white, no colored lights. Classic Charleston, she'd called it, meaning perfect enough for her social media. I stood at the counter, brushing a thin layer of butter over the rolls while the oven hissed softly. From the living room came the sound of my grandchildren laughing, two small voices tumbling over each other, fighting about who would open the first gift. The sound filled something in me that had been hollow for years. Lydia swept in, her heels sharp against the tile. She carried a tray of deviled eggs and that faint scent of expensive perfume she never wore before she married my son. "Careful with those rolls, Marjorie," she said, smiling without looking. "They burn easily." "I know," I murmured. She didn't hear me or didn't need to. The woman moved through her own house like a performer hitting marks. Every gesture had a practiced grace, from the tilt of her chin to the way she adjusted the red napkins I had already folded. I used to tell myself she was nervous around me, that it would soften with time. 3 years later, I stopped pretending. Ryan appeared behind her, balancing 2 bottles of wine. "Mom, can you pass me that corkscrew?" he asked. His voice carried the same tired politeness he'd used since the day I moved in. I handed it over, catching the brief flicker of gratitude in his eyes before he turned away. That flicker had once been enough to keep me trying. I picked up the wine myself. Lydia added, "It's from a boutique in Mount Pleasant Organic. Small batch, all that." She poured herself a glass before handing the bottle to Ryan. "We'll open the other one at dinner." I nodded, pretending to listen while my hands went back to the rolls. I'd made the same kind every Christmas since 1983, back when Ryan was still small enough to sit on the counter beside me, his fingers dusted with flour. David, my late husband, used to call them lucky rolls. He said they always came out soft when the family was happy. I hadn't told him that they hadn't risen quite right since the funeral. The clock above the sink read 6:45. Guests were due at 7. Lydia's parents, a pair of retirees from her church group, and one of Ryan's work friends who didn't have family nearby. I wasn't on the guest list, but I was expected to help host. Lydia had used that phrase earlier, her smile sugar-coated. "You'll be our secret weapon, Marjorie. You make people comfortable." I'd smiled back, because what else could I do? My pension covered half the utilities, and my name wasn't on the deed. By 7:15, the living room was a chorus of holiday chatter. I carried the rolls to the table, sliding them beside the glazed ham. Lydia's mother complimented the centerpiece, fresh magnolia leaves and white candles. Lydia accepted the praise with a gracious laugh, never mentioning who had arranged it. Ryan caught my eye across the table, a small, apologetic smile hovering at the corners of his mouth. I returned it. He looked older than 40, the lines near his eyes deepening every time Lydia corrected him in public. When everyone gathered for the toast, I lingered by my chair, trying not to notice the single place setting missing from the end of the table, the one where I usually sat during family meals. Lydia had said earlier she wanted a tighter layout for pictures. The cork popped, glasses lifted, and laughter filled the room. I forced a smile, though something cold had begun to settle in my chest. It was Christmas Eve on Meeting Street, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger inside my own family. The meal began like any other holiday dinner, with too much talking and not enough listening. The chandelier cast a soft gold over the table, catching every reflection of glass and silver. The smell of cinnamon, turkey, and candle wax hung thick in the air. Lydia sat at the head, her hair gleaming like something staged for a photograph, her smile perfectly framed between her parents. I sat toward the end, between the grandchildren. Ava was wearing the velvet dress I'd bought her last Christmas. The one Lydia had said was too old-fashioned. She didn't seem to mind tonight. She giggled as Mark tried to scoop mashed potatoes without dropping his fork. Watching them made the noise fade. For a moment, I could almost pretend we were the family I used to imagine, warm, close, simple. "All right, everyone," Lydia announced, lifting her wine glass. "To family and to gratitude." We echoed her words. My glass held apple cider instead of wine. I didn't mind. I preferred to keep my head clear. She gave her practiced smile again, the one she used when selling houses to strangers, and took a long sip. When the toast ended, Ryan began carving the turkey. Lydia leaned forward, arranging dishes, correcting details. "Mom," she said to her mother, "try the cranberry chutney, it's organic." I waited my turn as the platters moved around. The table was long, and with every pass, I noticed how Lydia's eyes darted past me. Finally, when the food reached my end, I lifted the serving spoon, careful not to spill anything. That was when Lydia's hand shot out and stopped mine. "Wait," she said, still smiling. Her voice carried easily over the soft murmur of conversation. The room seemed to still, the children's laughter fading. "Before you serve yourself, Marjorie, maybe we should be fair about things." Her tone had that sweetness that always meant danger. "Fair," I repeated. Quietly, she set down her wine glass and looked straight at me. "You didn't actually contribute to this dinner, did you? I mean, financially. Robert and I paid for everything: the turkey, the wine, even the vegetables. You've helped in the kitchen." "Yes, but we all helped." The words landed like ice water across the table. Ryan froze mid-cut, the carving knife poised above the platter. His eyes flicked to me, then back to his plate. "I helped cook," I said, my voice barely more than air. Lydia tilted her head, the way she did when she was about to make a point no one asked for. "Helping isn't paying. Marjorie, you didn't actually put anything toward the meal." A silence stretched thin around us. I heard the faint clink of a fork, someone clearing their throat. Lydia's mother shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The children looked at me, confused. Ava whispered, "Grandma, aren't you eating?" Lydia smiled at her daughter. "Grandma's learning that adults share responsibility." "Sweetie, it's important." Ryan placed the knife down with a metallic tap. "Lydia, let's not—" "No," she interrupted lightly. "It's fine. I just think it's good to be transparent. That's all." I stood there, the serving spoon still in my hand, my plate empty. The smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the air, suddenly suffocating. My fingers trembled slightly. "I wasn't aware there was a rule," I said quietly, "about paying to sit at the table." Lydia's expression softened, mock sympathy behind her eyes. "Of course not. It's just, when people don't contribute, it feels unfair to those who do." No one moved. Even the candles seemed to burn more harshly. I felt the blood rise in my face, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I placed the spoon back in the dish and straightened my shoulders. "I'll leave it then," I said, keeping my voice steady. Ava reached for my sleeve. "Grandma, it's all right, honey," I said gently, patting her hand. "Finish your dinner." Lydia's smile returned, wider this time. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." I walked out of the dining room without another word. The hallway lights felt too bright as I passed the mirror, catching a glimpse of my reflection, the same dress I'd worn the Christmas before, the same brooch David had given me on our 40th anniversary. I'd thought it made me look festive. Now it just looked foolish. Upstairs, the faint echo of laughter rose again from the table, muffled by the floorboards. It was the sound of a family moving on, As if nothing had happened, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the closed door. Somewhere below, plates clinked, wine poured, and the evening carried on without me. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter drifting up through the floorboards. The steady rhythm of forks against plates carried through the house, cruel in its normalcy. My empty plate still sat downstairs on the table, as if I'd simply vanished mid-meal. The little Christmas tree in the corner of my room blinked unevenly. One of the bulbs had burned out. I'd bought it at a discount store 2 years ago, when Lydia said a second tree upstairs would clutter the aesthetic. So I'd kept it small, barely 3 feet tall, with silver ornaments that caught the light when I turned them just right. Now, even that small joy seemed dim. I loosened the pearl brooch on my dress and laid it on the nightstand beside David's photo. He was smiling in it, sunburned and squinting, holding up the redfish he'd caught off the Battery Pier. It had been our last trip before the heart attack. I'd sold the boat the following year to help Ryan with the down payment on this house. He never knew that was the money that kept his loan from falling through. The floor creaked as I shifted. My knees ached, not just from age, but from the weight of everything I'd carried here. Boxes of old dishes, furniture Lydia said she didn't have room for, and every bit of hope that family would make the loss of David hurt less. Instead, it just gave the pain a new address. I tried to remember the last time Lydia had spoken to me kindly without an agenda. Maybe when Ryan lost his job years ago, before she realized my pension could fill the gaps. Back then, she'd called me Mom and hugged me when I offered to help. Now it was always Marjorie, said with clipped politeness, like she was talking to a tenant late on rent. I'd told myself for years that things would settle, that she just needed time, that young families were under pressure. But somewhere along the way, every kindness I offered had turned into expectation. I cooked dinner most nights. I cleaned when she was out showing houses. I paid half the utilities without complaint. And still, I was treated as though I owed rent for breathing. The humiliation at dinner wasn't the first. It was simply the first I couldn't swallow. I stood and opened the dresser drawer, running my fingers over folded sweaters that smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. I'd kept a notebook there, the one where I tracked expenses, pension deposits, grocery lists, Lydia's reimbursement notes that never came. I flipped through it now, scanning the careful handwriting. Each line of numbers proof that I had kept this household running longer than they cared to admit. Somewhere below, the dishwasher hummed to life. I imagined Lydia stacking the plates I'd washed, claiming the night a success. I closed the notebook and placed it on top of the dresser. My hands were steady again. The anger that had burned sharp an hour ago had cooled into something colder, cleaner. I'd spent 3 years bending myself into gratitude for scraps of decency. Maybe it was time to stop bending. I turned off the little tree, plunging the room into darkness. Downstairs, the laughter finally faded. Only the faint hum of the dishwasher remained, steady and distant, like a clock marking the end of something I hadn't yet named. By morning, the house smelled faintly of cold gravy and disappointment. The dining room still bore traces of last night's celebration, empty glasses, a wrinkled tablecloth, crumbs glittering like salt in the early light. No one had come upstairs to check on me. They hadn't even knocked. I rose quietly, the ache in my joints sharper than usual, and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. From the landing, I could hear the distant buzz of Lydia's voice downstairs, clipped and cheerful. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of her clients. Her laughter floated up the stairwell, practiced and bright, as if the night before hadn't happened. When I reached the kitchen, I found her phone charging on the counter. The lock screen glowed a picture of Ava and Mark in matching sweaters, and below it, a few notifications flickered in preview. Group messages, Her phone hadn't locked yet. I shouldn't have touched it. I told myself that even as I picked it up, but something inside me, the part that had stayed silent through every slight and every forced smile, wanted the truth more than it feared the guilt. The phone unlocked with a swipe. Her passcode had always been Ava's birthday. She never imagined I'd remember. A list of messages opened before me. The group was named Caldwell Family Chat, a title that should have included me but didn't. The most recent text was from 2 days ago. I scrolled up, the words forming a story I hadn't asked to read. Ryan Mom's been hinting again about wanting to help more. Maybe she's worried we'll ask her to move out. Lydia good. Let her worry a bit. We need her pension through March. At least until the refinance clears. Ryan, you said you'd check that senior place your cousin mentioned, Lydia. Yes. The Palmetto Grove home. It's cheap, $450 a month. 4 beds per room. She'll be fine. They do Sunday bingo. I stopped reading for a moment, the air in my chest turning to glass. My thumb trembled as I scrolled further. Ryan, if she asks questions, we'll say it's temporary, just until we redo the guest room. Lydia, exactly. Once her money stops being useful, I don't want her moping around the house. Ryan, she's family. Lydia. And family should contribute. Remember the same phrase from last night. Now typed in cold text bubbles. I felt something inside me unravel. The tiles beneath my feet seemed to tilt. 3 years of compromises. Of believing my presence was a burden only in my head, all of it reduced to a budget line and a deadline. A new message popped up as I stared. Lydia's mother. I can ask at my church. They have charity programs for lonely seniors. Maybe she can volunteer there until you move her. Lydia perfect. Keeps her busy. Less chance she'll notice what's coming. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might drop it. My hands were cold. Outside the window, the Charleston morning shone clear and deceptively gentle. A delivery truck passed, scattering sunlight across the porch railing. Somewhere upstairs, the grandchildren were awake, their small feet running down the hall, their laughter spilling into the same house that held this quiet betrayal. I pressed my palms against the counter to steady myself. I'd spent my life teaching Ryan to stand up for what was right. I'd sat through nights of overtime sewing work, made sure his lunches were packed, sold David's fishing boat so he could have a home, and now that home was planning to send me away like old furniture they no longer needed. I turned off the screen and placed the phone exactly where I'd found it, the charging cable still coiled neatly beside it. My reflection in the black glass looked calm, but inside, something hard was forming, a certainty, sharp and unfamiliar. The illusion of belonging had cracked. Beneath it, the truth gleamed cruel and simple. I had never been part of their family, only their plan. Upstairs. Ava's voice called out, asking for breakfast. I drew a slow breath, straightened my shawl, and walked toward the stairs. Whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes. The phone felt heavier than usual as I held it in my hand that afternoon. Lydia had taken the children to visit her parents, and Ryan was somewhere in the garage, pretending to fix a leak that didn't exist. The house, for once, was quiet enough for courage to take shape. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years, Patricia Hensley. We'd worked side by side at the textile plant back in the 80s, sewing uniforms until our hands stiffened at the joints. When the plant closed, she moved to Somerville, remarried, and built a life that seemed so far from mine. Still, she was the kind of friend who never forgot birthdays and always sent a card. Even when I stopped answering them, I pressed call. The line rang twice before a familiar warmth filled my ear. Marjorie Caldwell. Lord, I was just talking about you last week. Her voice was the same steady, cheerful, full of sunlight. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying the tremor in mine. Patricia, it's good to hear you. I need to ask a favor. A big one. There was no hesitation. Anything. You just say the word. I didn't tell her everything at first. Only that I needed a place to stay for a while. Somewhere quiet, away from Charleston. I didn't mention Lydia's words at dinner or the messages I'd read that morning. Some betrayals were too raw to describe out loud. Of course you can come, she said. The guest room's empty since my sister moved out. You remember the old house on Cedar Lane still standing? Just older like the rest of us. Her kindness cracked something in me that I'd been holding tight. I pressed a hand over my mouth and nodded. Though she couldn't see me. Thank you. Pat, I'll bring a few things. I won't be a bother. Bother Marjorie. You saved me back when we were both 23 and broke. You think I'd forget that? Pack what you need. I'll make up the bed. When we hung up, the quiet returned, but it was different now. Lighter. The air no longer felt trapped inside the walls. I went to my dresser, took out David's photograph, my small savings book, and the folded letter with his handwriting on the envelope. For the first time in 3 years, I began to pack, not to visit, not to help, but to leave. By morning, I already knew what I had to do. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to leave a trace. Lydia had taken the children to school, and Ryan was gone for work. For the first time in months, the walls didn't feel like they were listening. I dressed in my best sweater, the soft cream one David used, and to say, brought out my eyes and slipped my pension book and ID into my purse. At the bottom, I tucked the small notebook where I'd tracked every cent I had spent since moving in groceries. School shoes, power bills, and even Lydia's imported coffee beans. Each line was proof of a life financed but never appreciated. The bus to downtown Charleston was nearly empty. Outside the window, the city shimmered under the pale winter light. The harbor mist rising like breath. I got off on Broad Street, right in front of the First Atlantic Bank. The marble facade gleamed against the gray sky, clean, confident, untouched by other people's shame. Inside, a young banker named Mr. Lawson greeted me with practiced politeness. What can I help you with today? Mrs. Caldwell, I need to update my account, I said, setting my purse down. Remove an authorized user. Name Lydia Caldwell. My daughter-in-law. He began typing, the keyboard clacking like distant rain, and the reason for removal. Personal security, I said. He nodded. Slid a form across the desk. You'll need to sign here. My hand didn't shake. I wrote Marjorie A. Caldwell in careful strokes, each letter sealing what 3 years of humiliation had loosened. When he asked if I wanted to cancel all transfers, I said yes, everyone. Mr. Lawson paused, his tone softening. It takes courage to do this, ma'am. I hope you'll have peace when it's done. I looked up at him. I already do. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of salt and freedom. I walked to a small cafe and ordered a black coffee, sitting by the window as if rediscovering the city. For once, I didn't feel invisible. By dusk, the streets glittered with Christmas lights when I returned home. Lydia stood in the kitchen, her phone pressed tight to her ear. I told you. The account's empty. It says access restricted. She turned sharply when she saw me. Marjorie, did you go to the bank today? Yes, I said evenly. I had a few things to take care of. What things? Updates. You might want to call them tomorrow if something looks off. Her expression flickered between suspicion and fear. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. Ryan's name flashed on the screen as she turned away to answer. I walked upstairs, the sound of her panic following me up each step. Hours later, the house was dark except for the blinking lights of the tree. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. I turned it over. 23 missed calls from Lydia. I silenced it, set it beside David's photograph, and finally lay down. The house creaked with the cold, but for the first time in 3 years, I slept without waiting for morning. The next morning, sunlight streamed across my bedroom floor, touching the edge of the packed suitcase waiting by the door. I'd barely slept, though not from regret, more from the strange stillness that follows a storm. The air itself seemed cautious, as if the house knew something had shifted. Lydia and Ryan hadn't come upstairs. Their voices had filled the night in low, frantic bursts, muffled behind closed doors. At one point, I'd heard Ryan say my name half accusation, half disbelief, and then the sharp sound of a cupboard slamming. It hadn't frightened me. Nothing about them frightened me anymore. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Lydia had once refused me food. The morning light fell across the marble counter, revealing fingerprints from their restless hands the night before. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "We need to talk. Please don't make things worse." I set the phone face down. I'd spent my entire life making things easier for others, softening blows, mending tempers, erasing tension before it became visible. This time, I had no interest in making anything easier. At 10, I walked back to the bank. Mr. Lawson greeted me with the same polite professionalism, though this time his eyes flickered with quiet recognition. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell. I've finalized the new accounts as requested. There are just a few documents for your signature." He slid the folder toward me. Inside were neat rows of forms, the clean precision of bureaucracy. My pension deposit authorization, the updated account details, the closure of the old joint account. My name appeared over and over, typed neatly at the top of each page. For years, I had signed papers for others' school permission slips, home loans, checks for weddings, insurance renewals, even the deed to Ryan's first house. Every signature had been an act of giving, but this one was an act of reclaiming. My pen hovered above the line. The ink flowed smooth and dark, each stroke steady. When I finished, Mr. Lawson stamped the final page, the sound sharp and satisfying. "All set," he said, sliding me a copy. "You're the sole owner now. No other access." I nodded, folding the papers carefully into my bag. My heart should have felt lighter, and in some ways, it did. But beneath the relief, something else stirred an unease that hummed low, like an echo that refused to fade. Outside, Charleston moved at its usual pace, horse carriages clattering down Meeting Street, tourists with cameras, church bells calling the hour. The world hadn't changed, yet mine had been quietly rewritten. I walked a few blocks before stopping at a small stationery shop. I bought a single envelope and a card ivory with a gold edge. Back at home, I sat at my desk and began to write. To my son and his wife, I wrote, "By the time you read this, my affairs will already be in order. You taught me that contribution defines worth. So from now on, my efforts and my resources will go where they are respected." I sealed the letter, placed it on the counter, and exhaled slowly. The faint trace of guilt lingered at the edges, but it wasn't shame, it was memory, dissolving. When I turned off the light, the room fell into a calm that felt almost sacred. Freedom, I realized, didn't roar. It arrived softly, like a signature drying on the line. Somerville greeted me with a kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. The streets smelled faintly of pine and earth after rain, and the air carried the lazy hum of a town that had nothing to prove. Patricia's house sat at the end of a tree-lined road, a modest single-story cottage with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked gently when the wind passed through. She opened the door before I could knock twice. "Well, there you are," she said, her arms wide, her smile unguarded. The familiar scent of lavender and bread wrapped around me like a memory. "You look thinner, but stronger somehow. Come in." Inside, everything felt lived in crocheted throws over the couch, potted herbs by the kitchen window, and a cat asleep on the back of an armchair. Patricia moved easily through the space, pouring coffee, chatting about the neighborhood as if no years had passed between us. "Sit," she said, sliding a steaming mug across the table. "You'll have to forgive the mess. I wasn't expecting company, though heaven knows it's good to have it again." I sat and let the warmth of the cup seep into my palms. For a long moment, we didn't talk. We didn't have to. There was something sacred in that silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, just present. When I finally told her the truth about Lydia, the humiliation, the messages, the bank, Patricia listened without flinching. She didn't interrupt or gasp in disbelief. When I finished, she simply reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "You did what you had to," she said softly. "Some people don't learn until they lose the comfort they mistook for control. Don't waste your breath on guilt." Her words sank in deeper than I expected. Guilt had been the one companion I'd carried from Charleston, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far. But hearing her say it, in this house filled with quiet dignity, loosened its grip. The days in Somerville settled into a rhythm. Mornings began with the sound of Patricia's kettle whistling and the light tapping of rain against the window. We'd sit on the porch with our coffee, watching the mail truck roll by, or gossip gently about the neighbors' flower beds. Sometimes we'd drive to the farmer's market for peaches or biscuits, laughing like girls again. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The house, the noise?" I thought about it, about the clatter of dishes, Lydia's sharp heels on the tile, the way Ryan's voice softened only when he wanted something. Then I looked out at the magnolia tree swaying in the slow breeze. I missed believing I was home. I said, "But I don't miss the cost." Patricia nodded, understanding more than I said. That night, as the cicadas began their chorus and the porch light cast a warm glow over the yard, I realized peace wasn't quiet, it was respect made visible. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of silence. It was a gray Saturday morning in Somerville when Patricia called from the kitchen window. "Marjorie, there's someone outside." I looked up from the newspaper and felt the stillness around me shift. Through the lace curtains, a white SUV idled at the curb. Even from a distance, I recognized the shape of Lydia's shoulders, rigid, purposeful, dressed for persuasion rather than comfort. And beside her, two smaller figures waited quietly, Ava and Mark. For a moment, my heart forgot how to beat. Patricia's voice softened. "Do you want me to answer it?" I shook my head. "No, I'll handle it." When I opened the inner door, the cold air rushed in. I didn't step outside. Lydia stood at the porch steps, clutching a paper bag. Her lipstick faded and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The children were dressed neatly, but their faces held the confusion of long car rides and hushed arguments. "Mom," Lydia began, voice trembling. "Please, can we come in behind her?" Ava waved hesitantly. "Grandma, I drew you something." She held up a folded sheet of paper, the crayon colors bright against the dull day. A stick figure family smiled under a yellow sun, 4 people and a small gray cat. My throat tightened. "I can't, sweetheart," I said gently. "It's not a good time." Lydia stepped forward, the paper bag crinkling in her hands. "I brought biscuits from your favorite bakery. We need to talk." "Please." Her voice broke on the last word, but I didn't move. I thought of all the mornings I'd made her breakfast, the afternoons I'd picked up the children from school when she was too busy showing houses, the nights I'd heard her laugh downstairs while I folded laundry. Every kindness had been cataloged, priced, and used. "Talk about what?" "Lydia," I asked quietly. She flinched at the calm in my voice. "About what happened. About Christmas. About the bank. Ryan didn't know you were going to do that. We were We were counting on that money. I know you were. I said, that was the problem. Ava tugged at her mother's coat. Mom, it's cold. Lydia looked at me, then really looked. You're angry. I understand. I deserve it. But the kids miss you. I miss you. We just want to fix things. Her words trembled between sincerity and desperation. I wanted to believe her, to step forward, to wrap Ava and Mark in my arms and forget everything. But then I remembered the messages, the plan to send me away, the way she'd said helping isn't paying, while I stood holding an empty plate. Patricia appeared quietly behind me, setting a steady hand on my shoulder. Marjorie, she said softly, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Lydia's expression flickered hope, then frustration. Please don't do this. Don't let her turn you against us. No one turned me. I said, you did that yourself. Her eyes filled, but there was something else behind them. Panic, not remorse. We're struggling. Ryan lost 2 clients. The mortgage, I'm not your safety net. I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. I was family until the money ran out. That's not family. Lydia, that's business. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. Heavy with the weight of things that couldn't be unsaid, Ava stepped forward, holding the drawing again. Can I leave this with you, Grandma? I opened the screen door just enough for her small hand to slip through. Thank you, my darling. Her fingers brushed mine warm, trembling, trusting. I'll keep it safe. Lydia swallowed hard, her breath visible in the chill. If you ever decide you're ready to talk, we'll be waiting. I know, I said, but not today. She nodded stiffly, turned, and guided the children back to the car. I stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared around the corner. The drawing still in my hand, inside. Patricia watched me quietly. You did the right thing, she said. I unfolded the paper and traced the crooked crayon lines. The little gray cat sat between 2 smiling figures. One of them, I noticed, was standing a little apart from the rest, still part of the picture, but not trapped inside it. I pinned the drawing on the fridge, then I made tea. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 days after Lydia's visit, I thought the storm had passed. The mornings in Somerville had begun to feel steady again, coffee with Patricia, a walk to the park, the small rituals of rebuilding a quiet life. But peace, I've learned, has a way of drawing noise to its doorstep. It happened just after sunset. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain and magnolia. Patricia and I were washing dishes when a sharp, furious voice cut through the stillness. Marjorie Caldwell. The sound was unmistakable. Ryan. Patricia looked up, startled. I froze. Water still running over my hands. Marjorie. He shouted again, louder this time. You can't just walk away and take everything with you. We hurried to the front of the house, through the lace curtains. I saw him standing in the middle of the street, red-faced, one hand balled into a fist. His car idled behind him, headlights glaring against the porch. Neighbors had begun to peer through windows, the kind of quiet curiosity that travels faster than gossip itself, Patricia whispered. Stay inside. I shook my head. No, let him see I'm not hiding. We stepped out onto the porch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Ryan, I said, you're making a scene. A scene, he snapped. You humiliated us. Mom, you froze the accounts, you walked out without a word. Lydia's been sick with worry. The kids? Don't, I said sharply. Don't use the children. He stopped short. The anger in his voice cracked, revealing something smaller fear. Maybe. Or pride wounded beyond repair. You had no right. He said that money kept the house running. I had every right. I answered. That was my pension, my name, my work. You've been living off it for 3 years, and not once did you treat it or me with respect. Ryan glanced around, realizing the neighbors were listening. Mrs. Hill from across the street had stepped onto her porch, arms folded. The Johnson boy had paused his bike by the curb, staring. Go inside, Mom, he hissed, his voice dropping low. You're embarrassing yourself. Patricia leaned against the railing, her voice calm but steady. No, Ryan, she's not the one embarrassed here. He turned on her, his temper flashing. Stay out of this. This is family business. Patricia didn't flinch. Then maybe you should have treated her like family when you had the chance. A few murmurs rose from nearby porches. Ryan's face reddened further. He pointed at me, his hand trembling. You're turning everyone against us. You don't know what this has done. Lydia's losing clients. The mortgage stop. My voice cut through his like a knife through fog. You want to talk about loss. You lost my trust the moment you stood by while your wife humiliated me at your table. You watched. Ryan, you said nothing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The weight of the words hung between us, heavy and absolute. The car horn blared behind him. Lydia, sitting in the driver's seat, her face pale and drawn. Ryan, she called, get in the car. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he exhaled hard, muttered something I couldn't hear, and turned away. As the car pulled off, Patricia slipped an arm around my shoulders. You all right? She asked. I nodded, though my throat burned. Across the street, Mrs. Hill gave a slow, approving nod before stepping back inside. The neighborhood quieted again, but the air felt different, lighter, clearer, like a curtain finally pulled open. Patricia smiled faintly. Well, she said, that ought to set the record straight. I looked out at the empty street, the porch light reflecting off the wet pavement, and let the silence settle where shouting had been. Weeks passed quietly after the confrontation. Ryan never returned to Somerville, and Lydia's number stayed buried in my phone unanswered, unseen. Life in Patricia's house moved at a gentle rhythm, coffee in the mornings, the newspaper at noon, and long walks beneath the pine-lined streets. Peace, I learned, wasn't loud. It was the absence of fear that someone might open your door without knocking. Then, one bright afternoon in early March, Patricia came home from the market with a look that told me something had shifted again. She placed her basket on the counter and hesitated. You remember your husband's dresser, the one with the brass handles? I nodded. Of course I do. David built that drawer himself after the war. Why Patricia's sigh was soft but heavy. I saw it. Marjorie, at the antique market on Main Street. There's no mistaking that piece. It has your initials carved inside the top drawer. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The memory of that dresser came flooding back. David sanding it in the garage, his hands rough and sure. The scent of pine oil in the summer heat. It had followed us from our first apartment to every house since, and now it was sitting in some stranger's stall, a relic priced for the curious. Patricia reached out gently. They must have sold it after you left. I sat down, the words hollowing out something inside me. Did you ask how much $150? She said quietly. The vendor told me a couple brought it in about 2 weeks ago, said they were downsizing. The air in the kitchen grew still. Downsizing. That was Lydia's word when she meant losing. I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. They had taken everything once, my savings, my labor, my dignity. Now the things they'd taken were slipping through their own fingers. In April, the news reached me from another familiar source, Mercedes, a former neighbor from Charleston. She called one morning, her voice brisk with gossip and sympathy. Marjorie, I thought you'd want to know your son and his wife sold the house on Meeting Street. Word is, they couldn't keep up with the mortgage." I thanked her and hung up before the ache in my chest could grow too large. The house had been beautiful once, white shutters, hydrangeas in the front yard, the porch where I'd once rocked Ava to sleep. But in my mind, it had already ceased to be home the night Lydia told me I hadn't contributed. That evening, Patricia and I sat on the porch watching the last light fade through the trees. She poured me a glass of sweet tea and said, "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," I said simply. They built their comfort on something that wasn't theirs. When it disappeared, so did their balance. Patricia looked at me carefully. "Does it make you feel better knowing what happened?" I thought about it. There was no joy in it. No triumph. Only inevitability. "It doesn't make me happy," I said, "but it makes sense." She nodded, her eyes kind but searching. Sometimes consequence is all the justice we get. The next day, I walked alone to the market where Patricia had seen the dresser. It stood near the back, polished now, but still marked by faint scratches David had made with his wedding ring. I ran my fingers over the initials, D and M, and smiled. Faintly. The vendor noticed me lingering. "Beautiful piece, isn't it?" he said. "Belonged to an old family in Charleston." "It did," I replied, my voice steady. "Once, I didn't buy it back. Some memories, I'd learned, weren't meant to be reclaimed. They were meant to remind." That night, as rain whispered against the windows, I sat in the living room writing a letter I didn't plan to send. "You sold what was built with love to pay for what was built on pride," I wrote, and now both are gone. When I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, I felt something close quietly inside me. Not anger, not satisfaction, but finality. Outside, the rain slowed. The world kept moving. And for the first time, I no longer needed to look back to know that what had been taken was no longer mine to lose. Spring came slowly to Somerville, softening the air and tinting the magnolia leaves with fresh green. Patricia was the one who suggested I visit the senior center on Ashley River Road. "They could use someone like you," she'd said over breakfast, pouring coffee. "You're too sharp to spend your mornings rearranging flower vases for my sake." I laughed, but she was right. I'd spent years being told where I was needed, rarely where I was wanted. The idea of choosing my own purpose felt unfamiliar and a little thrilling. The center sat in a refurbished church, its white columns worn smooth from years of hands pushing through its doors. Inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows, falling on tables covered with jigsaw puzzles, bingo cards, and half-finished knitting projects. A soft buzz of voices filled the air, comforting, human, alive. The coordinator, a woman named Ruth Daniels, greeted me with a smile that reached her eyes. She was in her early 70s, her hair silver and short, her voice confident but warm. "We're always happy to have new hands," she said. "You sew, don't you?" Patricia mentioned it. I nodded. 40 years with a singer and bad posture to show for it. "Then you're perfect. We've got a quilting group that's been trying to organize donations for the Children's Hospital. They'll love you." That was how it began. Small, steady steps into a life that felt both new and old at once. Each morning, I arrived before 9. I'd roll up my sleeves, thread my needle, and lose myself in the rhythm of fabric and conversation. The women there, Elaine, June, and a retired librarian named Carol, spoke freely about everything from recipes to politics to the strange ache of getting older in a world that moves too fast. One afternoon, as we stitched patches together under the gentle hum of ceiling fans, Ruth came by holding a clipboard. "You know," she said, looking at my quilt, "you've got a real gift for this. The patterns you make, there's patience in them." I smiled. I suppose patience is what's left after everything else gets tested. Later that week, Ruth asked if I'd lead the new group of volunteers. "You've got a steadiness people listen to," she said. "They could use that." I agreed, though part of me hesitated. The last time I'd been trusted with responsibility, it had come with control, with expectation. But this was different. No one was using me. They were trusting me. Each quilt we finished bore a stitched tag made with care by the Ashley River seniors. When the hospital sent photos of children wrapped in our blankets, something inside me loosened, a quiet, steady warmth that no apology or inheritance could have given. One afternoon, as I packed up my sewing kit, Ruth touched my arm. "Marjorie," she said softly, "you remind people what dignity looks like." You know that I didn't know how to answer. I only smiled, grateful for the kind of respect that didn't have to be earned by sacrifice. When I left the center that day, the sun was lowering over the Ashley River, painting the water gold. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the smell of salt and honeysuckle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's story. I was exactly where I belonged, needed not for my money or labor, but for the quiet proof that life could still be built, one steady stitch at a time. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May. I found it tucked neatly among the flyers and electric bills, its white envelope standing out like a ghost among the ordinary. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold, rounded loops, careful strokes, the kind of penmanship Lydia used when she wanted to appear composed. It was addressed simply, Marjorie Caldwell Somerville, SC. No return address. But I didn't need one. I knew those letters anywhere. Patricia was on the porch trimming her roses when I came back up the walk. She noticed my face and tilted her head. "Bad news." "Not yet," I said, setting the envelope on the kitchen table. "But it's waiting." For the next several days, it stayed there between the fruit bowl and the salt shaker, untouched but impossible to ignore. Every morning, I'd sit down with my coffee, read the paper, and see it sitting like a question I didn't want to answer. Patricia never asked again, though her eyes lingered on it more than once. She had a way of understanding silence without breaking it. On the third day, she finally said, "You'll know when you're ready." That evening, after dinner, I went for a walk along the quiet stretch behind Cedar Lane. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the light from the street lamps painted soft halos on the pavement. I thought about all the words Lydia might have written, excuses, apologies, maybe even pleas. Each possibility carried its own weight. For so long, I'd imagined what I would say if she ever came to me again. I'd rehearsed it in my head like a speech, calm, firm, full of the dignity I'd earned back. But a letter wasn't a conversation. It was a one-way doorway if I opened it. I had to step through. When I returned home, the envelope was still there, catching the edge of the lamplight. I sat down across from it, tracing the faint indentation where her pen had pressed too hard on the paper. My name, my full name, written with the kind of care you give something fragile. Patricia came in quietly from the porch. "You're still staring at it," she said gently. "I keep thinking about what it might say," I admitted, "and about what happens if I read it and don't feel anything at all." "Then that's an answer too," she said. "Not every letter needs a reply." I nodded, but I didn't move. The house felt still, except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I thought about the months since Christmas, about how far that humiliation felt now, as if it belonged to another lifetime. Yet a single envelope could still pull the past forward like a tide. Before going to bed, I picked it up, held it for a moment, and placed it inside the drawer of the sideboard. "Tomorrow," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. Days passed. I went back to the senior center, quilted, laughed, even sang along to an old radio tune with Patricia in the car. Life continued easily, but the letter's presence lingered, a quiet reminder that unfinished things, never disappear. By the end of the week, I found myself standing by the drawer again, my hand resting on the handle. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was finally ready to know. The second envelope came 2 weeks later, smaller and smudged along the corners, as if it had been handled too many times. It was Patricia who found it, setting it on the kitchen table with a knowing look before heading out to water the azaleas. I didn't touch it right away. The first letter still sat folded in the drawer of the sideboard, opened but unfinished in my heart. Lydia's words had been careful, apologetic, filled with the kind of remorse that tries to balance guilt with justification. I'd read it 3 times before putting it away, unsure whether it had healed or reopened something. But this envelope, this one, was different. My name was written in uneven letters, the M too tall, the G curling awkwardly. The handwriting wasn't Lydia's. When I slid it open, 2 folded sheets fell out, one pale pink, the other blue. The smell of wax crayons drifted faintly from the paper. I unfolded the pink one first. Ava's drawing showed a little house beneath a wide yellow sun. The door was open, and in the window, a woman stood smiling beside a lamp that glowed bright gold. Underneath, she'd written in wobbly letters, "Grandma's house with the light on." The blue paper was Mark's. His picture was simpler, just stick figures holding hands in front of a porch. He'd drawn 3 hearts floating above their heads, one red, one orange, one green, beside the smallest heart. He'd written, "We miss you, Grandma." My chest tightened, the air going thin. I sat down slowly, the papers trembling in my hands. I could see their faces in my mind. Ava with her thoughtful eyes, always arranging things just so, and Mark, who laughed too hard at everything. I imagined Lydia giving them the crayons, folding the papers carefully, maybe even pressing a kiss to the corner before mailing them. Or perhaps the children had done it on their own, determined to reach me without permission. Either way, their small hands had bridged what grown hearts had broken. Patricia came back in quietly. When she saw the drawings, she said nothing. She only poured me a cup of tea and placed it by my elbow. I couldn't speak, not yet. The sound that escaped me wasn't quite a sob, more like a long, cracking breath that had waited too long to leave. I hadn't cried the night I left Charleston. Not when I read Lydia's messages, or when Ryan shouted from the street, or when I learned they'd sold David's dresser. But now, with 2 pieces of paper covered in crayon hearts and crooked smiles, I couldn't stop. The tears came slow at first, then all at once years of restraint dissolving into quiet gasps. Patricia sat across from me, silent, her presence a steady anchor. When the worst of it passed, she handed me a handkerchief and said softly, "You needed that." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "It's strange," I said, my voice hoarse. Forgiveness didn't come from the ones who owed it. It came from the ones who never should have had to give it. Patricia's eyes softened. Children see truth without pride. That's their mercy. I looked down at the drawings again. The sun Ava had drawn glowed unevenly, the yellow bleeding into the blue sky. Mark's stick figures leaned slightly, their lines imperfect but sincere. They were simple, fragile, utterly human. I reached for the tape dispenser and smoothed both pages onto the fridge door. Side by side, the paper crinkled softly beneath my fingers. The colors shone brighter in the kitchen light, filling the small house with warmth. That night, I left the porch light burning long after dark, not because I was waiting, but because, for the first time in a long while, someone had remembered that it was mine to turn on. The letter that followed the children's drawings was short, written in a steadier hand. Lydia didn't ask for forgiveness this time. She asked for coffee. Magnolia Cafe. Wednesday morning. I just want to talk. No expectations. I read it 3 times before deciding. Patricia didn't try to sway me either way. She only said, "If you go, go for yourself, not for her." So I went. Magnolia Cafe sat at the edge of town, a quiet place with chipped white paint and the smell of cinnamon and rain. I arrived early and chose a corner table near the window, where I could see the street and breathe if the room felt too small. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes, poured me black coffee without asking. "You look like someone waiting for something," she said gently. "Someone," I replied. Lydia arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a pale blue coat that hung too loose on her frame. Her hair was pulled back, her face thinner than I remembered. When she saw me, her smile was hesitant, fragile as glass. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lydia." She sat down slowly, eyes darting to my cup. "You look, well, I am," I said simply. The waitress returned with a second mug, and Lydia ordered tea. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us held the weight of everything we hadn't said and everything we had. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lydia finally said. "After everything, I wasn't sure either." She nodded, tracing the rim of her cup with her fingertip. "I've been thinking about what you said about family, about contribution." She laughed softly. "But it sounded tired. It's strange how we confuse help with control, isn't it?" I didn't answer right away. Her words were measured. But I'd learned that remorse and manipulation sometimes wore the same face. "Why did you really ask me here?" Her gaze lifted. And for the first time, there was no defiance in it. Just weariness. "Because I'm tired, Mom, of pretending, of trying to fix what I broke by pretending it never happened. The kids keep asking about you. I don't know how to explain why you're gone without making myself the villain." "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "Children know more than we think. They see what's true, even when we hide it." She nodded again, swallowing hard. "I've lost more than money since you left. Ryan and I were barely speaking. The house is gone. The business fell apart. I know I brought that on myself, but I wanted you to know I see it now." Her voice cracked at the end. I could see the effort it took for her to stay composed. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She was human. "Lydia," I said, keeping my tone even, "I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you're honest. But this I gestured between us can't go back to what it was, not the way it used to be." "I'm not asking for that," she said quickly. I'd like to start again. Slowly, for the kids. If not for me." I took a long breath, watching the steam rise from my coffee. "If we do, it has to be on new ground. There will be no money between us, no favors, only respect. If that's too hard, then it ends here." She didn't flinch. "I understand. Respect also means honesty." I continued. "If you need something, say it. If you're angry, say it. But don't lie to me again. Not about money, not about anything." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't look away. "I won't. I promise." We sat in silence after that, the kind that feels less like distance and more like rebuilding. Outside, a soft drizzle began to fall, tapping against the window pane. The sound was steady, almost comforting. When the waitress returned with the check, Lydia reached for it, but I placed my hand over hers. "We'll split it," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." As we stood to leave, she stopped me at the door. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "Even if nothing else comes of it." I looked at her. Truly looked. The arrogance was gone. In its place stood a woman who had finally been forced to meet herself. "Something already has," I said. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist. I walked back to Patricia's car, the smell of wet magnolia lingering in the air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone who had lost a family. I felt like someone who had redrawn its boundaries, and this time, with steady hands. The day after the meeting at Magnolia Cafe, the rain finally stopped. The world smelled new again, wet pine, cut grass, the faint sweetness of honeysuckle drifting through the open window. I woke early, restless, and wandered through the quiet house until my eyes fell on the corner of the living room where Patricia had set a small box days earlier. Inside was David's old lamp. Patricia had found it months ago at a second-hand shop in Charleston, tarnished. Forgotten, but unmistakably his. The brass base had been polished, the glass shade repaired. Its cord had been rewired by one of the men from the senior center who loved tinkering with old things. It just needed a bit of patience, he'd said. I sat beside it now, running my fingers over the smooth metal, remembering the nights David had worked by its soft glow ledger open, pen scratching quietly while the radio hummed in the background. That lamp had lit our first apartment, our children's homework, my sewing table, and eventually, the bedside where I read alone. For a long time, I simply sat there, watching the morning light filter through the curtains. So much had happened since that Christmas night. The humiliation, the silence, the slow reclaiming of myself. Even after everything, after Lydia's tears, Ryan's shouting, the loss of the house, the letters, the drawings. It was this small, ordinary thing that made the years settle into place. Patricia appeared in the doorway, a mug of tea in her hand. "You're up early," she said softly. I couldn't sleep. Her eyes followed mine to the lamp. "He'd be glad you kept it." "I didn't," I said quietly. "They sold it. But somehow, it found its way back." Patricia smiled. Things built with love usually do. She left me to my thoughts. Closing the door behind her, I reached for the plug and hesitated. The socket clicked softly as the prongs slid in. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, a warm, golden light blooming through the room. The glow filled every quiet corner, touching the walls, the curtains, the photos of David and the children on the side table. For a long moment, I just breathed. The light wasn't bright enough to dazzle, only to soften. It seemed to gather everything, the grief, the years of silence, the unspoken forgiveness, and make them bearable. I whispered into the stillness, "This light isn't for waiting. It's for peace." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, rustling the leaves like a sigh. Somewhere beyond the window, a new day began to unfold. I didn't know what would come next: letters, visits, maybe even a slow rebuilding. But I knew this: I no longer lived by someone else's permission to exist. The lamp glowed steadily beside me, its light neither desperate nor dim. It didn't call anyone home. It simply said, "I am here." And for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. A year passed quietly, marked not by loss but by rhythm. The seasons in Somerville turned with unhurried grace. Spring wildflowers gave way to summer magnolias, and the evenings settled into the slow amber light that always reminded me of home. I still lived in Patricia's house, though she insisted on calling it ours. The extra bedroom had become a small study where I kept my sewing machine and a desk cluttered with letters. Every Sunday afternoon, I wrote to Ava and Mark. Sometimes they wrote back short notes full of spelling mistakes and joy. "Grandma, we saw a rainbow today. Mom says we can visit soon." Their words carried no weight of the past, only the easy truth of children who loved without conditions. My days were steady. I still volunteered at the senior center on Ashley River Road, helping newcomers learn to quilt. The hands around that table changed, but the stories remained the same: grief softened by time, laughter rising through the ache. The rhythm of the needle and thread grounded me. Each stitch felt like a quiet proof that healing could be both ordinary and beautiful. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with Patricia, watching the fireflies shimmer in the dusk. We rarely spoke about Charleston anymore. Some things didn't need retelling. Their silence was enough. That autumn, I received a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside were more drawings, Ava's and Mark's again. This time, they had drawn a little house with 2 women on the porch and a single lamp glowing beside them. Underneath, Ava had written in careful print, "Grandma's light never went out." I laughed softly through the tears that came before I could stop them. Then I took the lamp David built, the same one that had followed me through every chapter, and carried it to the porch. The air was cool that night, the stars clear and bright. I plugged the lamp into the outlet near the railing, its warm light spilling gently across the steps and into the garden. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I murmured, turning the shade slightly until the glow faced the road. "It's for peace." The porch light stayed on long after I went inside, and for once, it didn't feel like I was keeping vigil for someone else. It felt like I was finally home.